I'm sitting here today with former, former Richmond City Council, Chuck Richardson. Mr. Richardson, I want to go back and look at the George Floyd case, and especially part of the verdict that was given in making the officer guilty on all three counts. What is your impression? Has this solved the problem? Of what?
You mean the effects of the verdict?
The effects of the verdict.
I don't think there's going to be any immediate effects of the verdict. I think there will continue to be shootings. I think African American males will continue to be have their rights abused and shot at the same rate. And it's alarming that in light of all of these incidents that the police have not become more mindful of the publicity and the consciousness of these racist shootings. There are still many Americans, not all, but we have many Americans who serve in positions as police officers, and their backgrounds are instinctively infested with attitudes of ideas of prejudice. When you have a system of slavery that existed over 250, almost 300 years, it inculcates within generations of people an attitude, and it is not something that they have to think about. When you see a black person as a former slave owner and has been handed down for centuries, there was a certain attitude that these police possess that even they are not aware of, because it's instinctual. It is in their DNA that when you see a black man, it is totally different than if you see a white man. So when they pull that trigger, they're not pulling the trigger on a person that is considered an objective victim or an objective subject of law enforcement. They see an object that they fear. And so they would instinctively continue to pull that trigger when under other circumstances they would not pull it, because it is something that's instinctual. What needs to happen is there needs to be a screening of police personnel to the extent that any racist proclivities that exist before you hire people can be identified.
It's almost like saying policy or culture. It is almost like with the history of the police and the culture of the police union. Is that what needs to change?
Well, look, the race goes not to the swift, but to those who endure. We are in a long-term process of changing the culture. America has for too long operated on the false narratives of equal justice for all, when in fact that narrative is nothing but a lie. We must change these ideas, and it has to be done over a long period of time. Anytime someone who possesses these types of attitudes that they themselves are not even aware of, it needs to be identified from the outset before you hire them.
It's almost like saying, since the verdict on George Floyd, you have had at least 6 other police shootings. And I guess the most recent one that I can think of is right here in Elizabeth City.
Right, Elizabeth City, North Carolina.
And now the prosecutor
refuses to release.
Why is all of that?
Well, you know, it's obvious that something is wrong, and we should never allow any system, we the people are in control. There is no one that should allow the concealment of information that is probative, that is proof, that is evidence that something wrong occurred. The only thing any of us ever hide are the things we are ashamed of, things that embarrass us, things that we become culpable and are in fact guilty of. So you don't hide things you're proud of. If they had that incident where a police officer saved a baby from a burning house, that video would be front and center showing off bragging. However, when something goes wrong that you're not proud of, and that may embarrass you, you conceal it. Obviously, the videotape in Elizabeth City would prove to be quite embarrassing to the police. If not, they would have released it. They would have believed in transparency. There would be nothing for them to hide. But this, in and of itself, says something about the police department and their policies of concealment.
Now, you had made a comment, and the comment was in reference to Trump being the best president from a white individual. I don't want you to read it, but can you paraphrase what he's saying in terms of...
Well, that was an interview. And the individual was obviously from a back country rural area, poorly educated. And this person was being interviewed, I don't know what station, but some of what he said was in essence that black people are getting out of control. That it used to be where this type of thing happened, this type of behavior would never have been tolerated. And he said, why, in my pa's day, they would have been whipped and carried out to jail with no question. Them Negroes is getting out of control, and they is pushing white folks to a limit to make them do these things. They is got more rights than Negroes ever had, and we needs to hang a few of them so that the others would behave and stay in their place. Now these are realistic 2021 comments by a poorly educated rural person from South Carolina. Now, America ain't what it was, and it's all caused by uppity ones, the ones that just wants to agitate good white peoples into doing things that they don't want to do. These Negroes done been told by outside communist agitators that they have rights that ain't so. We need some good, strong white boys like in my pa and his brothers used to be, who knowed how to set things right and knowed how to keep Negroes in their place in a quickness. Now, these types of ideas coming from a person who believed these things
today,
in 2021, and who feel reinforced by Donald Trump, who urged people to do the type of moronic and idiotic things like charging the halls of our lawmakers. They are inspired and they think it is okay to break the law. That's what's so sad, that it's 2021 and you still have people of that mindset today.
it's almost like saying there is no need to have studies because it sounds like the same thing's going on in 65 with Dr. King. How do we change the culture?
Well, we can change the laws because laws are official guidelines of accountability. But we cannot change the hearts of people through the laws. The hearts of people will be changed through a process of education, awareness, the transventilation of ideas from one group of people to another.
Is that on the books anywhere to be done?
My book is scheduled to be released within the next 30 days, and all of these issues what happened to me at Henrico High as we integrated the first all-white high school. Those types of things, what the racism that existed in the training as a Marine Corps machine gunner in Vietnam, the racism that occurred when I was elected to city council, and how the whole system of institutional racism, where people were led to believe that black people were not capable, that they were incompetent. I had fellow council members, white, tell me, Chuck, and I'm not going to name them because they thought that they were fair, decent people. But he said, Chuck, y'all just don't have the understanding of municipal budgeting and large-scale municipal bonds and the management of large systems where people have to manage things and that they know about them and are intelligent. You all don't have that capability. That was another council member that told me that. He grouped us all.
It is almost like saying, since the time you went to Vietnam, since the time you've been on council, what has changed? What has remained the same?
The more things change, the more it seems they remain the same. Very little in terms of a fundamental viewpoint has changed. Because subconsciously, even though people don't say it, subconsciously there are too many white Americans, and some of them are well-intended, and they believe they're right. But there are a lot of white Americans who still subconsciously believe that they know better for black people than what black people know for themselves. They still think that subconsciously, and some of them make conscious decisions on being more intelligent. But it seems that through the process over time, where black and white people would interact, it seems as though we will have known or learned by now that color of skin is no determinant of quality of a human being.
One's character. Now, we talked about the color of one's skin, but if you look at the rebuttal that Senator Scott turned around and gave from the Republican Party, the black man, what is all of that about?
What they call Tim Scott, Uncle Tim. And, you know, he's speaking for a certain element of people where the chains have been removed from our ankles, but it's still around our brains, firmly. It is obvious. Let's take, for an example, the police accountability, where they want to change, and in order to bring some accountability to the police and law enforcement across the country, they want to make the municipality accountable, not the individual. And Uncle Tim is making that a point as if it's progress. If you take away the personal level of accountability, you release the pressures that force police to do their jobs properly. If they know that the city is going to pay for me if I make a mistake, you release the pressure that they're under to do right. I can violate the law because the city is going to pay for it. I can violate this law because I won't have to go to jail. I can violate this law or mistreat this person or hurt this man based on the color of his skin, but I don't have to pay the price because the city is now held accountable by law. You got to maintain that accountability on a personal basis, that if a policeman violates a right and shoots someone unlawfully, he needs to know that he is going to pay a personal price by going to jail or worse.
How can, or how did they give police immunity?
You cannot, and it has not been done yet. There should be no such thing as immunity. When I was on city council, and our mayor at that time, Henry Marsh, wrote a law. It's called extraordinary expense account, which meant we changed the council law to allow council members to get an extra $200 a month because the pay at that time was $6,000 a year, which was not enough to do the job, and even on a part-time basis, there was just no way that that was financially feasible. But when we wrote that law in, some citizens sued us as a council, and we had to pay back. I had to find friends to pay back $10,000 of my personal monies back to the city for the money we had received over the years. It was personal liability that I had to account for that law, for violating what they consider law in the courts. And it's the same, by the same token, policemen, if you don't maintain a personal level of consequences, accountability, they will not feel the need to do the job properly and respect all people equally.
So what is it going to take to change that? Because once it's changed, the police will not be a strong arm, a better word to say, in terms of arresting black folks. The way
well, it's going to take time. It's going to take education. It's going to take continued interaction between the races. You would think by now that most people with a half a brain should know by now that all people are equal. In fact, when you look at people like Barack Obama with his intellect, his articulation, his wisdom, his poise, he's equal to any person notwithstanding color. When you look at people like LeBron James, great basketball player, but highly intelligent. When you look at people like Halle Berry, off top, those individuals, Muhammad Ali, some of the best human beings on earth, you would think by now all those names, those people,
successful,
those people who have demonstrated the ability, the tenacity, the intelligence to equal any man or woman living on earth. But still, subconsciously, there are people who carry the notion that black folk are different, that they are less than. And once we eradicate that subconscious attitude, people will begin to understand that there is no difference in color. Of all the things, while I served in the military, all the things that distinguished a man, I knew some black men who stood next to me because the machine gun was a crew-served weapon. You had people who had to fire the gun. You had people who had to feed the ammunition into the cartridge. You had people who had to carry the tripod and asbestos gloves to change the barrel when it got too hot and start to melt. There were different things, and we had to become close together. And we were a unified group of men who fought for each other's lives.
Now, you sit down and talked about the war.
Go
ahead.
I was in the middle of that point that there were people, you could distinguish them, whether they were afraid, whether they were cowards, whether they were courageous, whether they were honest, whether they were liars. A lot of things distinguished those men under life and death circumstances. The color of a person's skin was never a determining factor, because I found those men, regardless of skin color, both maintained ideas, attitudes, characteristics, traits that were not good, and some were good. But color was never the determining factor between good and bad men who were courageous, who were cowards, who were strong, who were weak, who were honest, who were dishonest.
Now, you just sit there and spoke on when you was at war in Vietnam. What are your thoughts of what's going on with Afghanistan today?
Well, I think we've come to a point in time now where America has ceased to become the policeman of the world. Certainly, we have moral obligations. But as I point out in my book, and I've been a long time working on this book, and there are many stories that relate to things like forgiveness, maintaining anger, pride, humility, forgiveness, remorse, friendship, honesty. All of those things I try to point out in the events of my life that reveal these qualities in people. And I have to admit that color is one thing that I was able to learn about and overcome as a human being. And that is why today in America, as radical as some people thought I was, and as much as I might have been characterized as a pro-black representative, I was a pro-right individual. And I know that a white man in America will be not only the salvation, but the determining factor as to whether or not this nation will survive, whether or not we will prosper, and whether or not we will live as a mutually fruitful nation. Because it's going to be up to good white people to join with good black people to institute a systematic issuance of justice. And if I did not believe that, I would not continue to maintain the kind of hope for America, because people want to divide us. There are forces out there that want to convince white people that they are better than others and therefore should join with them. But we've got to come together. No person or no race of people has been more committed, more loyal than the black man to America. We have stood by the white race through every war, all of the trials and tribulations, all of the natural disasters. The black man has been right there standing toe to toe with his white brother, making up this nation called America. And you cannot divide us. We have to bring us together, because our differences, our variation of qualities and talents and skills make America what it is. And if we try to distinguish them and say that we are less than, or that someone is better than the other, we will make our nation weaker. We are strong because of our differences. And that is going to be the salvation of our nation as a one single-minded group of people made up of varying colors and cultures and backgrounds and religions and nationalities. That's when we come to that realization, that's when we will start to learn that in Vietnam, those men pulled that trigger on me, not because of the color of my skin, because of the doctrines America was trying to project. That was why they fired upon me, not because of the color of my skin, but in America, sadly, my white brother won't pull a trigger or withhold the pulling of that trigger based on my doctrine. They do it because of skin color, and that has to change, or we're going to hurt ourselves, each other.
Now, I want you to define atonement, what it means, what atonement is in relation to you and your book.
That's a different cause. My book, I point out in many instances. I hope my book will be sooner rather than later. But in my book, there are many instances. There's the one story of the white machine gunner who had a Confederate flag on his helmet. And his aide gunner, who happened to have been black, didn't like it. They got into a disagreement over it, but it was over beliefs. And atonement is when a people who have been wrong acknowledge that wrong. And until you acknowledge that you have made a mistake, that you have sinned, that you have had a flawed quality in your behavior as a person and as a group, until you come to understand and acknowledge that truth and defy those false narratives upon which this nation was based, when you do that, it opens the door to a mutually arranged relationship where you have trust and respect. And when we do that, when white people begin to understand that, yes, we did wrong and we want to atone, and the first thing we have to do is recognize that it was a mistake, and then we can move forward.
But until that happens,
we will continue to deceive one another, to hide the truth from one another, to do those things that would validate the fact that you did wrong and you're not willing to acknowledge it. That is something that we have to get beyond, and that's why those statues, which I have from the day I was on council all the way up until last week, fighting to remove those symbols of hatred, divisiveness,
on Monument Avenue.
On Monument Avenue, those statues have been nothing, just constant sources of bitterness, confusion, remorse, anger. Those statues are much larger in terms of their implications. They have much more to say about this country and how we feel than just it's a statue of a man on a horse. We don't praise those statues because of the bronze material and the marble stone and the iron we don't praise those statues for those physical elements that make up a statue. We praise them because of what they stood for. And they stood for the defense of an institution that was so cruel, so unjust, so horrifically destructive that they needed to come down. And people who still believe that they should stand, they cannot do that without acknowledging that they still believe in what they stood for.
But if you look at it, they stood for treason.
Of course they did. They stood for treason. They stood for the same thing. Those people who attacked the Capitol on January the 6th, those people were trying to harm the institution of democracy, and there are those who will still deny the fact that it was nothing but a treasonous act for everyone who ran up to the Capitol thinking they were right, and yet knowing all along that what Mr. Trump had inspired those people to do was nothing short of treason.
It's almost like saying, if you look at what happened up in Washington, D.C., and all these people did what they did, nobody got hurt, nobody got charged. But if I'm driving the car and you use the one in Windsor, Virginia, back in December, he gets pulled over by the police. And he could have got shot. We're going right back again to culture.
But we have to make a long story short, it's all based in honesty. It's all based in having the privilege of being just, truthful, honest, and fair. And somewhere it's written that you must speak the truth, and the truth shall set you free.
Now, I understand what you're saying. I believe in what you're saying. But if you look at your former president, he turned around and said that the votes were stolen, all of that. So how are you going to get to the truth when they're going to continue to lie?
I don't know how those people see. Those people don't believe that there was a stolen election. They know better. It's been proven too many times. They know better than the fact that there was no fraud. They know better. But for them to admit that they were wrong, they would have to drop the argument that their whole movement is couched on. It's couched on a belief in white supremacy.
Bottom line.
That drives the whole argument. So they have to have a reason to justify this anti-American movement. And their justification is that since they stole the election, that's not a democracy. Well, their movement is couched upon a lie propagated by one man, Donald Trump, and he did it not because he loved America, but because he loved himself, and he lost an election, and he refused to believe that someone else was more loved than he. And Joseph Biden did not believe that it is right to grab a woman anywhere you wanted to because you were rich and famous. He didn't believe, most of the people in this country did not believe that you should make fun or belittle a disabled person. They didn't believe that you should divide children from their parents, mothers and fathers. Most Americans did not believe that you should cuss and belittle other third world countries and use vulgar names to describe them. Most Americans didn't believe that a war POW hero like John McCain should have been belittled and castigated like Donald Trump did him. Most Americans did not believe that people should not have help no matter how poor you are. Most Americans did not believe so many of the things that Donald Trump stood for, that he didn't lose the election from the day of the election. He lost the election when he began to say these things that were distasteful, ugly, rude, cruel, hateful. When he started to do that and exhibit to America, when he started to convince people that he really could go out on Madison Avenue and shoot somebody dead and get away with it, he believed that, and the people who follow him believed it, and they refused to face the truth that this election was not stolen. This election was given away by a man who was crude, hateful, vengeful, unfair, and that's why he lost the election. I don't think they will ever admit that, because they would have to admit that they were wrong.
What would you like to say in closing?
Well, I'd like to say in closing that America is the greatest nation in the world to be living in, no matter what color you are. And I don't have a whole lot more time left on this earth. I'm over 73 years old. But I have hope for my children. I have 2 great-grandchildren. I have hope for them. I have hope that the black and white people will come together. I have hope that we will transcend those types of things that Martin Luther King articulated so eloquently in his day. I have hope and belief that most Americans believe in the brotherhood of man and the decency and integrity of our constitutional tenets. I have hope that we will prevail, because those people who believe in white supremacy are wrong, that slavery was wrong. It was wrong in the eyes of man and in the eyes of God. You cannot continue to prosper when the whole foundation of your beliefs are based on unjust, are based on cruelties, are based on unfair and arrogance, but based in love that this country can stand for. And my hope is that we will someday, in closing, manifest those beliefs in our behavior.
And on that note,
And on that note, we close and say, God bless America. God bless all Americans, no matter what color you are.